Hello, hello.
Hey.
This is episode 57 of Biweeklycast. We are still here. We are the hosts. I'm Dima Malenko.
I'm Slava, and today we're going to talk about the second and the third orders of AI.
Right. Do you think which order effect is it that we ran the countdown to start the recording? Is it AI? Is it second?
It's a zero order.
Okay, it's very super direct. Good stuff. We do have a little bit of follow-up. Is it, given that we sort of established that I typically bring follow-up to a podcast, is it kind of weird that I say we? Is it should I be worried about that?
If you ask me, no, you shouldn't be worried. If you'd like, I can sign your follow-up, so it would be our mutual.
Okay, I'm relieved. Yeah, thanks. Thank you for that. Last item we discussed, and I think I started to capture this follow-ups right after we finished recording last time. We talked about quote by Ilya Goldert, which said that what did it say? Yeah, tell me how you measure me, and I'll tell you how I will behave. And with continuation, if you measure me in an illogical way, don't complain that I behave in illogical ways. After that, and after the recording, I said that could have been just a Goodhart's law, right? Which reads, when a measure becomes a target, it ceases to be a good measure. And then we went a little bit into discussing who is Goodhart? Why does he have a law? Turns out Charles Goodhart was a British economist, and yet he drove a whole bunch of British economic policies, like monetary policies and stuff like that. And he kind of coined this law, which says when a measure becomes a target, it ceases to be a good measure. Interestingly enough, in Wikipedia, there is more scientific definition of this law. Maybe that's a quote from his paper or something like that, because it sounds very posh. And it says, any observed statistical regularity will tend to collapse once pressure is placed upon it for control purposes.
Which doesn't really change the sense, but sounds different.
Sounds different. It could be interesting to ask ChatGPT or some other AI to simplify and kind of rather what does it mean? Maybe we can run this experiment towards the end of
which is going to be based around a text. And this text is kind of a report. It's hard to say.
Yeah, I think
you reviewed your notes, and I see your overall reaction to the document.
Yeah, well, I think it is a report. And it says the document provides a summary and analysis of the most significant themes and key insights from the foresight exercise delivered by Aspen Digital in August 2024, the Doris Duke Foundation's Shangri-La estate. That's a report. Like, something happened, people analyzed it, and now they tell the world about that thing.
The thing that bothers me that the outcomes that are listed there, basically it's structured into a few chapters, and each chapter is explaining some midterm and probably long-term effects of using AI at different areas, say in education, politics, something. And it kind of mismatched just with what I know of foresight activities. I don't think it's a brainstorm like it was described in the text, because how they describe their methodology, that they at first discussed older technologies like internet, social media, something else, and talked about some obvious and not so obvious effects, something that happens and you expect one thing, and then time goes and it changes something else, and then even more time goes and it changes everything. And this everything is the third order. The non-obvious longer term thing is the second order, and some obvious changes that happen straight after the technology is launched is the first order. And they suggested these exercises for retrospected technologies to get people in the mood, and they talked about it. And I'm not fully convinced that this is what they got in this report, in the second and third order effects, but good try.
Yeah, I also found it interesting, like the methodology. It's great that they at least described how they kind of arrived at what is discussed in the document. And also, yeah, it would be super curious to hear from you what's the kind of the usual or more traditional way of setting up for foresight exercises. But here, at least, like the idea I understand that they had is to put together people with diverse backgrounds and diverse expertise and talk about what AI could mean for the humanity or whatever it might be. And I think it's kind of still good that they took steps to hopefully try to put people in the discussion, in the groups, in the right sort of state of mind for this to be more productive. Like look at how we could have analyzed prior kind of big shifts, big technologies, and then leverage that to move forward. I think it sort of relies on this notion of wisdom of the crowd a little bit, doesn't it? But also where it says that oh, big number of not necessarily uneducated, but big number of people who are not experts can produce an estimate that can be very accurate to the true kind of stuff. But also, I think that there are limitations to this method, and it's not always working perfectly. It's interesting.
Unlike all other methods that always work perfectly.
Well, that's a good point. I think maybe with other methods, I don't know. Like we do have a tendency with some of the things to be more explicit and specific to say it works only for this or under these conditions. But there are some things that seem like common sense or kind of very neat. We tend to forget to discuss about their domain of applicability.
I think that the small groups or the mid-sized groups decisions are usually really dependent on people who join these groups. And if it's Aspen Digital, you could assume these people are a bit well prepared and a bit more educated than an average brainstorm you would have somewhere. At the same time, it depends on whether they have strong polarized positions on something. Because if you get people with very radical positions, they tend not to find any middle ground. If you get people who are balanced, who are neutral towards the topic, but they can see valid arguments from both sides, these groups tend to produce way more rational and grounded decisions. So if you design the groups properly, I think it works. If you misdesign or include the radical opponents there, it turns into a debate, which is another kind of exercise.
Yeah, and it does have a feel that some of the items were maybe more of a debate than actual exploration of being causal, trying to build causal chain of this leads to something, and this has these effects. Circling back, what's the better or more established way of doing foresight exercises?
I think the closest business equivalent to foresight would be scenario planning, when you basically build up a tree of possible scenarios. You reinforce this tree with some signals saying that I think that this scenario is driven by these signals and drivers, and this scenario is supported by these trends. And there could be some, as they say, forks in the road, like when things could split depending on what happens there. And they try to describe as many as possible that still make sense. And usually it looks like a tree with best case scenario, worst case scenarios, plausible scenario, wild card scenario, and something like that. And in this document, I haven't seen the variety. They basically described a scenario, something that I think they name realistic or plausible, but really hard to say because it doesn't look like a foresight summary to me. Because I would expect something more optimistic described as a single timeline or future, something more pessimistic described as a single timeline or future, something just random and crazy described as an alternative timeline or future. And there would be some evidence, observations, and signals that support each of those. And then you can put your level of confidence, like which of these scenarios seem to be the most realistic.
That makes a lot of sense. And I think maybe sort of subconsciously reading the title, second and third order effects of AI, I expected something along the lines of what you described, to be this thing to be more systematic and sort of more specific, because second and third order effect is a very specific thing, right? If you call something like that, or at least I expect that the discussion around that is also at the same level of kind of specificity and
And the problem
detail.
here that they just took the topics and they put some second order effects, but from different scenarios. Like there is a positive scenario and there are some second order effects from there. Then there is a negative scenario and there are some second order effects from there. And they're kind of mixed up. And in many cases, they cannot coexist. Like if this effect happens, then the other is automatically cancelled. That's why it's kind of hard to read, because like, wait, how does it correspond?
Where does it come from? The same thing. But that's great. Like what you describe with scenario trees and stuff, it is an attempt to make sure that we do due diligence at exploring all possible variations of future. And I think it makes a lot of sense, because it is so easy to kind of ideate some sort of an idea or an effect and then construct justifications for that and if it is not related to what else is around this, it's so easy to believe it when this thing depends on something that could never happen in real life conditions. Cool. Now that we established that the methodology, while it was a mixed bag, like, right? Maybe we put it this way. There were some good points, some not so good points. I have a slightly unrelated question to this. Like in the title of the document and also in the title of the chapters, they put AI as .I. But then in the text, like in the regular text, they put AI as AI, just two letters. Does that bother you? Like, what's the right way? How do you do that?
I don't put the dots just because of saving time. I'm not sure it's the proper or correct way, but whenever I text AI, I don't use the dots, like in most other acronyms or abbreviations.
Right. Yeah, I was surprised. I thought like maybe in title they tried to be fancy or maybe forgot about that. But then in some other chapter titles, they also use A.I. Like if there is some sort of a rule for that,
Even in
it's
the
super weird.
footers, like on every page, actually.
Right. Well, yeah, but that's the reciting of the title of the paper. Yeah, it looks weird. So I think we are in agreement that we should just put it AI as a acronym without any
That would make
silly
sense.
dots.
Since we've established this fundamental question, we can actually try talking about the content.
Yes, let's try to do that. Like, were there any specific things that jumped at you?
I personally have a feeling that most of the points, let's take education as one of things that I feel the most confident about, are all second order effects. Like I read their ideas about ability to see potential, establish concepts of knowledge and reasoning, adaptive and lonely learning. They all sound like second order effects to me, but from different scenarios. I was trying to find something third order. If we circle back to our episode about result chain, what would be the latest? And I can't find it yet, because basically, if you remember, there is an activity, then there are outputs, then there's outcomes and impact. And I think that most of these things are outcomes. You can't really say, so what? Like, yes, learning is going to get personalized. Guess what? It's going to get personalized even without an AI. Like,
It's getting personalized.
it has been a trend long before large language models, and they have just accelerated the trend. What will change? The way we approach education, the way we learning styles, individual pacing. So what? What is going to happen after that? Is it going to change our attitude to education? What's going to be our private education models? How it's going to transform corporate learning? That's the thing that should be third order effect. And I haven't seen any of those in any chapter.
Right. Yeah, we are sort of continuing on this method of topic here, and I agree with you. At some point I thought like, oh, like whatever is presented is more of kind of passing a judgment, saying like we don't like it, like established something of education is going to be overthrown. Yes, maybe, like you said, like so what is it, like why do we presume that it is going to necessarily be bad? That's what was missing for me in this paper. There's a lot of judgment and a little bit of scaremongering how bad or crazy stuff could be, but I would really love to see, like, why do you think that this is going to happen and what we can do about it? Because sometimes things can happen, do we want them or not, and our best way to deal with them is to figure out like how to deal with them given that they're happening.
Let's take one example just to be more specific. Let's say that education does become very adaptive, that AI overlords know what you should learn and guide you in this way. Their assumption of second order effect that people will be less social in this regard, because right now they interact a lot at campus. And this is where it's kind of unclear why they decided so, because these are very different trends. Solitude and loneliness are not an effect from or the outcome out of adaptive learning system. You can perfectly manage an adaptive learning system in the campus among the students taking courses. Like, it's totally doable even right now. So when they connected these three things into one effect, it kind of started losing the validity. But still, let's imagine that there is some ground for that. They would probably come to certain conclusion that our education system might need transformations. And what are these core transformations? Where should we start? Should we change the model of universities and colleges and make centers of expertise? Like, just to get the very best experts of something so they would be able to feed the AI learning models that would be teaching us, and they would be the reference point. And
Right.
basically we split finally the science and education, and the science people go and do the science, and education people support and facilitate the groups and add the collaboration, motivation, and all the other important competences people need to get, while they are getting the hard things in the form of tests, essays, and all the other stuff in certain environments based on AI, even on campus. And I think it's kind of hard to visualize because people are resistant to the idea of big change here. Like, during the entire report, no matter whether the effect was positive or negative, I got a strong feeling that people who described it were like, we'd rather not, please no, slow down, we don't want that. And I can totally see how in the note somewhere you quoted that you feel that it's just people's anxiety and stress noted down about some topics, which is a nice activity. I think it's fine to talk about the fears and just don't name it a foresight.
And I would agree with that, and maybe I'll try to connect what you just said to some other point. I think that they have it in the paper itself, where in the beginning they say that AI is such a compound term. There is no kind of single like this is AI. Like we cannot say, like, you cannot hold AI in your hands. It's such a complex term. It means different things for different people, and it adds complexity to even kind of talking about this kind of stuff. And I was glad that they kind of acknowledged that. I was not so happy that they did not leverage that acknowledgement in the follow-up discussions. And I agree that details do matter. You need to look, especially if we intend to be honest about the effects that we try to foresee, we need to be specific and get into the details. Like, even here in personalized education, they portray this as a sort of a new thing that AIs makes possible. But I take exception to that, because my learning experience in the university on the campus was different than my peers' learning experience. When I went to kind of library or to play football, they went to do something else. They had different interactions. They worked on different topics. They were interested in different things. Our education already was personalized. And like, did we say that it was bad or good? We just said, like, oh, it is what it is. Like, let's deal with it.
I think what they mean here is that it will decrease the necessity of interactions like GPS navigation does these days. Previously, you would have to ask for the way, ask for direction, and interact with people just by the design of the technology that was taking you there. You had a paper map, you had some signs on the road, and then if you're lost, you would ask people for directions. These days, you just don't do that. You're in the new city and you wouldn't ask for anyone's help.
Yes and no. I think that this can be a good example of those second and third and whatever order effects in here, because we say that if we go from paper maps and kind of paper dotted descriptions of how to get somewhere, we do not get a chance to interact with strangers to ask them about the directions, and we lose that bit of interaction. But what about people not going somewhere because they feel it's too complicated and too cumbersome and too unreliable? They decide to stay home and they miss on the interactions they could have had should they get to their destination. If I'm going to a conference, like, what's more important, me interacting with strangers about the directions on how to get there, or actually getting to the conference to interact with people over there?
One more thing that they mentioned there, I think it was in a different point about the lost experts, that we might be losing some skills and competences in the process. I can totally see that right now, because just a few weeks ago, I was on a drive to a place outside of Kiev. And at a certain moment, there was an air raid and they shut down the GPS system. I felt helpless. Like, couldn't really find the way because I firstly didn't have a paper map. I did manage to find a Google map, but I did struggle understanding where I am. Like, what is this intersection? What is this road? And the basic navigation skills are not there anymore. And we rely on some tech so much that when it's not available, like I did find out, I struggle. And these are the basic survival skills. Like, this is something people could use in case of emergency anywhere. Like, if the electricity goes off, if there is no internet or available GPS navigator, how do you actually get from point A to point B to be safe? And this is a safety issue. If we speak about something not so safety related, people would be even more reluctant about that. These skills will deteriorate. These days, most people don't remember multiplication tables because, like, they can get the calculators, and that's fine, because it's really hard to imagine how calculators could go wrong, like, completely and totally. And I can totally see how AI model that we don't understand, that we don't know how to check, and that operate beyond even their developers' capacity, could one day create this effect that people will trust AI way more than other people or some previous work, and will just believe. It's like a religion, basically. We believe that this AI is an expert in something with no way to check.
Right. Well, I agree to that point. Like, the struggle is real there. The loss of, I wouldn't say necessarily the expertise, rather loss of understanding of deeper internals of processes that we deal with is real. At the same time, I don't think that is specific to AI. Maybe AI makes this challenge more pronounced in more places, but we do have this thing, like with GPS navigation has nothing to do
Like,
with,
most people don't know how their phone works, and that's usually fine.
with AI, yeah. And like it is also known, not to say crisis, but this is a challenge, for example, in aviation industry, where pilots are gradually losing skills of flying aircraft manually, and there is a worry about that like, if things go wrong, they might not be as ready or as capable of handling those emergency situations. But at the same time, it is interesting to also talk about what's the reason for that. It's not because the AI is so evil or someone else is so evil. It is just plain safer on average to have kind of autopilots or automatics to kind of drive aircraft is not the right word, like to fly aircraft, as opposed to just having humans fly them manually 100% of the time. So there is kind of economic and otherwise pressure for more automation, right?
Totally. And I think here you could probably remember your own example when we were talking about places to store our episodes. You were so doubtful about any third-party solution, and you wanted things on your server that you know where it is. A server is still kind of a third-party solution, but
Right.
it's the least dependent on another business that decides, like, We are not going to do that anymore. And in this regard, you were looking for a backup plan for business continuity. Like, what would be the other friendlier way to upload a podcast? Hell yeah. Do you understand how these ways work? More or less. Do you have any control on how this technology is going to be used in the future, like the algorithms, the searches, even the information safety? The moment you start relying on this tech, you kind of give up a number of freedoms and discomfort.
Sure.
Can basically like driving modern cars. Like if something goes wrong with my car today, chances are I will not fix it. Like my first car I used to drive was quite straightforward. You could just take a wrench and fix most of the things just by yourself.
Yeah, totally right. Like how many people would be able to drive a car with manual transmission now? But that's, and then they would of course not even understand how the automatic transmission works and how is it important. Why would automatic transmission have this L or kind of lower gear or one to what? Why in the world would you need that? That's true. And yeah, you're right. Like and that example is with podcasts and stuff is a very good one, because then there might be kind of, like I said, economic pressure to, like, it's easier. I can have less hassle past publishing episodes and stuff like that. But what happens if you give up certain degrees of control? For example, like one of the things is back in the day when you use those services, it would generate the kind of RSS feed for you automatically. And some of the things, like they would compile or compose title of an episode in a specific way. And if you don't like that, you have no way of changing it. It's like, it's give it or take it proposition. And then you weigh what's more important, me saving a little bit of time or having control over this thing. And the answer can be different in different situations.
Yeah. Plus, we could always see that right now, as for instance, you have personal experience in editing podcasts, you can operate with Riverside a bit better. People who come to Riverside without previous experience in editing podcasts, they still can learn, but the level of proficiency is way lower. Like, yes, there are still experts in editing podcasts, but let's imagine 10 years from now when Riverside goes like absolutely crazy. They suggest the edits, they cut all the noises, they improve the pace, the levels, and everything just so automatically that you just talk and then you click publish and you have no idea where it goes. Well, the worst case scenario is that your podcast will not be published, or it will not go well enough, or there will be censorship that you can't control or something. But I mean, they're minor. What is major is the fact that people will rely on AI in decision making. And one thing are the technicalities, and the other is that even these days, I can see people who give up analytical skills, give up forecasting skills, give up system thinking skills, and delegate it to AI. And you need previous experience to estimate the outcomes of the answers. Like, yes, AI can quite effectively make the battle planning for Ukrainian army, but who takes the responsibility, who makes the call, and are we okay if one day people will not be part of this equation? Because, well, AI can be more skilled in many domains, but do we still want people who, in case we lose the access to AI, can still have the backup plan and support us?
It's such a profound question. I think if we frame it, if we generalize it a little bit and then frame it, like when you say, like, what's the backup plan? It's like, it's almost if we have two branches. We can think about, what if the stuff kind of gets better? We can leverage it for the betterment of humanity, and that's one branch. For example, like in this way of thinking, it would be better if AI drove our cars. Like every model or kind of every prediction says that if we exclude humans from the equation, there it is going to be safer, more effective, wins all around. Like we're not, technologically, maybe we are not quite there yet. We are definitely like too far, like that transition.
Yeah, but you can picture that.
Yeah, is almost impossible to think of, but it could be better. So like if we envision, like things are going to get better in the future, it's only like, can we invest into that? But then there is another different side of the coin, where it's like, what's the backup plan? Like, what if the stuff fails? Like, can we still function if these things fail? And this is such a profound thing because things can fail not through the shortcomings of their own, right? There can be like a supernova burst that sends electromagnetic pulse towards Earth and kind of wipes out all the electronics and on the particular side of the Earth and stuff like that. Good that we still can go into that area, help people there where we don't have those facilities to automatically drive cars. Like, it would be great to have people who could go and do that. I guess finding balance about moving forward and kind of advancing the progress while keeping our butts, pardon my French, safe in case things go wrong for different reasons. Or yeah, I think that's the profound question of all of AI and technological progress, I think.
Yeah, and one of the things that people feel safe in their places when they are not at risk. But let's say Ukrainians had to reconsider many skills that they didn't have in 2022. Even the things you have at home, like the basic survival stuff, which seemed impossible. Like in 2021, nobody would even think about that. Given our history, we should have, right? Like there were trends and tendencies showing that things might go south, and we ignored these tendencies. So this is what is kind of concerning, especially at the level of, let's say, strategic risk management. We live in the world of cyber warfare. The next big virus could just go loose, like, and people can lose control of things. And most of AI solutions that we have, they are private. These are just businesses like yours and mine that operate on certain level of security, but we are by no means so protected. Like there's always a risk of cyber attack. If, for instance, tomorrow most AI tools wouldn't turn on, I can still imagine how I can run my business. Like, yeah, things will go slower. Things might get a bit more expensive, and some, like, making an episode of a podcast would be more effort and more money, but I mean, it's still doable. I can still imagine how the foundation of my company will survive without that. I can totally see that people today rebuild their businesses based on automation, based on AI, and that's also fine. It's part of the progress. The question is, do they have the business continuity plan? In case something goes wrong? Because when we rely on something as the essential and fundamental, how are we going to support it? Like, how are we going to protect it? Are we sure it's going to be there when we need it?
Right. That's true. But I think that to an extent that's true in other kind of lines of businesses, not related to AI.
Yeah.
As well, if you open
like medical sphere comes to mind,
or even if you open a small shop and the value you provide is that instead, like, you go to a big grocery store and buy stuff in bulk, which is a little bit cheaper, you transport it and you provide convenience to the neighborhood. Like, what happens if that supermarket closes? Like, what's your business continuity plan there as well? It might be maybe less dramatic than AI systems failing or medical kind of expertise.
I think in your example, people feel a bit more control here. It's hard to manage the industrial change. When things change at the level of technology worldwide, you're just part of the trend these days. When you make a call whether you would like to open a pharmacy or not, well, that's your everyday decision. And yes, there are risks for every decision people make, but these risks are manageable. Moreover, you can comprehend them. In this case, at the industry level, you can't comprehend many things that are happening. And this is where it gets scary, because somebody has to do risk management and nobody can assess or estimate the risks. Like this report, they tried to show some potential effects, and the risk assessment there was more like personal fears list rather than risk assessment.
Right. On that last point, I think that with this report, we got what we kind of planned for, in a sense that if we get people together to talk to and chat and maybe explore a particular topic, this is what you get. People chat, they explore a particular topic. We get a little bit of a stream of consciousness from them, because if we put people with the specific goal of estimate the risks of use of AI for this particular business and this particular situation, the outcome and the setup would have been different. Like we would call specific people with specific expertise. We would be very intentional about that. We would be very intentional about the outcome we expect from them, and we would put certain parameters that say we expect to hedge this thing by X amount of dollars or revenue, whatever it might be. So the outcome would be, I would say, more practical, and there would be people who know how to do that. It's just not exactly the group of people who was present in this particular discussion.
Yeah, I think one of the science fiction can teach us a lot here, because in many cases, I'm going through Scalzi's series about expeditionary force right now. And in this book, the aliens destroyed the electric infrastructure, like the power plants and everything. And the most successful regions were the least developed regions, like people who still relied on some basic agriculture, and older tech became automatically way more effective, and they could survive. They became richer because they still could produce electricity from the windmills or from some older kind of things that people even forgot how to do. And one of the interesting effects that whenever this conversation happens, I can see a few kind of people. There are tech optimists who say like, well, we have survived so far. We will most likely survive in the future. Just like we handled the previous progress. Here we are still alive. We are fine. It will go on. Just it's the nature of the progress. And then there are tech pessimists like, well, things can go terribly wrong. The fact that we haven't seen this previously doesn't mean the next turn isn't going to be the last turn. And then there is a way smaller group of progress realists, like people who say, yeah, like there are ups and downs, there are risks, there are critical innovations and just innovations. And just innovations make total sense. Like it's the optimization and improvement, and we should totally do that a lot. With critical innovations, we probably should be a bit more careful, like we were with nuclear energy and weapons. Like, let's get some regulation and control, and like we don't give away nuclear tech everywhere, and we try to monitor the usage, and we try to influence institutions, countries, and organizations that experiment with it because it's critical. And do we consider AI overall as a tech critical? Is it even possible to regulate, given it's a private sector? It's not military or government based. And if this regulation even happens, who is going to enforce it?
Yeah, those are tough questions. And you're right, depending on where you're coming from, are you a tech optimist or tech pessimist or whatever else, you would come with different solutions to these problems. And what's interesting, I think, about those solutions, the solutions you are coming from are in some way, shape, or form beneficial to you, right? If you're an optimist, you come and like solution, no, it's fine. Like let's move over. Let's maybe put a little bit of guardrails, but we need to accelerate the progress. We need to invest more, whatever it might be, because this is sort of what is beneficial for that group, that they can benefit from things developing in that direction. Someone is coming up with like, yeah, we need more regulation. It's likely that they can benefit in some shape or form from that regulation, either by having a regulatory capture or kind of just benefit from being an arbiter of what's allowed and what's not allowed, and that kind of thing. But yeah, this is challenging. It's difficult. We don't know what is going to happen, and the actions that we take, they influence what's going to happen. And some things don't happen precisely because we thought that they could happen, and we did something about it.
Well, the thing is that most previous strategic shifts in technology have been one or another way government controlled. Like there has been a serious level of regulation. Internet, like at first, was so regulated.
Why? I think people say the opposite. Like they say like there is not enough regulation in the internet, and if people had foresight, it would have been regulated much more heavily from
I mean, at the rollout, like it was the infrastructure and the tech. It basically came from the military direction as well, and it It hasn't just evolved on the free market.
I would take a little bit of exception to that. Yes, kind of initial investment into development of technology came from government because the level of investment required was not feasible for any private entity, or at least, yeah, and the uptake for private entities would not have been as obvious. But then the dot-com bubble and all of those things, they were driven by private markets and private technology.
Yeah. That's exactly an example that initially the push was there. The AI is probably one of the first that was purely driven by private businesses. Yeah, there is a certain degree of government investments, especially in Asia, as far as I know. But still, like they have a very specific purpose there. I think we should get back to the doc because these geopolitical macro questions are a bit complicated and I don't feel experienced enough.
Right. Yeah. And they talked a little bit about that, like the overall hype, like everyone tries to jump on the bandwagon. The level of investment there is just crazy, like in billions of dollars, like a pocket change for AI space.
Yeah, well, I could probably say that given an example of internet, when people stop using the word internet, this is when third order effect actually happened. I remember in the early days, people said, "Oh, I found it on the internet." When today somebody says, "I found it on the internet," people are like, "What do you mean internet?"
Where else would you find it?
It's just, I don't know, do you mean ResearchGate or do you mean this platform or are you speaking about this specific implication of, and World Wide Web is not even pronounced anymore. Like it's just the spaces and functions that happen somewhere. I think with AI, it's going to be very similar. Like I think the day when people will stop learning how to use AI will be the day when second and third order effects will be way more visual and obvious. And that day is not soon. Like I can see that this is years from now.
I think I would agree with that. And what, in my view, what happens in AI space a lot, like we do invest enormously in the technology, and we figured out a lot of stuff there, the kind of the LLM kind of as a particular set of technology in the space, making huge strides forward. But with that, we have not quite figured out like what are the best ways to use and leverage that capability, and we are still in that kind of trying an exploratory phase where we try to, like, what if we slap AI over here, AI or LLMs over here? What if we slap it over there? Will it work? We are still figuring out this stuff, and I wonder that are we up for another like AI bubble similar to how we have had bubble in the beginning of the.
Yeah, that sounds quite realistic. And I think that what we are kind of missing is that most things happen on the edge of a few technologies. It's not usually a technology that changes everything, but it's like the availability of, let's say, online stores and Nova Poshta in Ukraine, an amazing fast delivery service that transforms the customer experience dramatically. Like if you just have the online stores, but still the old delivery method,
Right, exactly.
Without those innovations, online stores by themselves do not fly. And it's logistics plus e-commerce that create a big shift and they transform the industry.
Right. And I think that that's a great example. And what's interesting about it, that none of those things can happen in isolation, right? You would not invest in kind of logistics infrastructure unless you know or see that there is a demand for that. And if you're trying to predict where the kind of mail or parcel or package delivery business is going to go just by looking at parcel delivery business, you're going to miss this as an opportunity or trend in a bigger world. So yeah, that's a very good example.
And can we say that this is possible because of internet? Totally. Could we predict this effect in the early days? Most likely not.
Yep. That's true. It is funny, right? Like every once in a while, you would come across an article how people in early 20th century predicted how the future is going to look like with pictures from magazines and whatnot. And it is so funny because like there you clearly see, oh, the people think that things that already exist will continue to exist and they will just morph in a aspirational ways that they think about them right there in the moment. There is totally lack of vision, and rightfully so, to predict something that you cannot even think in the moment about, that is like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 steps removed from what you have now, but you have to go through those steps to get there, and you cannot predict it unless you go through those steps.
Absolutely. That's why I think foresight overall is a useful exercise. And whenever people feel concerned or troubled, they should probably try doing it. And not just describing a single scenario that they believe in, but describing multiple scenarios, learning the trends and tendencies and drivers, and if possible, looking at these second and third order effects. Maybe even getting advice from people who can talk about that with more expertise, because at our common level, even this report seems very broad. The topics they picked: development and governance, labor, education, democracy,
All over
art.
the place.
I can't imagine a person who would be competent to talk about foresight at least in 2 sections. Like this would be different people for every section, in my opinion, if I were moderating such an activity.
Yep, I agree to that. Like when it always helps and makes sense to stop a little bit and think about where the stuff might be going, and then you will discover what are the bits of information that would be interesting or critical to making judgment about those things, and that's always helpful, I think.
So shall we ban the AI discussion in Biweekly for 5 years and see how things evolve?
Yeah, we probably should scale down a little bit on discussing AI, because we fall a little bit in the same trap as this report. Like we tend to indulge ourselves in hypotheticals and things of that nature, which is fun to an extent, but then how useful is it really? Yeah. And unless maybe something major happens, we probably would, I guess, indeed refrain from talking specifically about AI as a whole.
Cool. And now we will let AI adjust the levels and put together our conversation from different countries.
It's just an algorithm. It's not necessarily AI. Or maybe like when we call it AI, it sounds better, I guess.
It's like a boogeyman, you know? There is something in your computer that will do the job.
I think like I have at least slighted you what's in my computer and how it does the job. Maybe not all is lost.
Well, you're the ex-CTO of a tech startup. For me, it's getting way harder.
I can totally see that. Like I feel the same in some other areas as well.
Well, that's not a very optimistic ending of this conversation.
No, it's good. The end is going to be optimistic. The next weeks are going to be good.
Hopefully, good weeks. Yeah.
Good weeks.